So we hit a really big milestone in the Driscoll household this week. My daughter can officially ride a two-wheel bike with pedals. And as I let go of the seat and watched her pedal away all by herself for the very first time this week, I was just noticing through her voice and through her actions just that insane amount of exhilaration that comes with riding your bike unassisted for the very first time. That feeling of excitement mixed with fear, mixed with the unknown of how it's going to end, with the pure joy of the feeling of movement and just that freedom that comes along with it. Just that combination of mixed emotions that creates that pure exhilaration is just, it's amazing. And I watched her, I was reminiscing about the very first time that I was able to ride unassisted. And that kind of got me thinking about some other times in my life where I felt that intense level of exhilaration, of excitement and fear mixed together. And actually just a couple minutes ago I finished a workout, and as the workout was finishing, my 90s playlist on Pandora played a song by a group called Matchbox 20 called The Real World. If you're not familiar with it, you could Google it and see how it links up to the story that I'm sharing today. But this combination of seeing my daughter with this intense level of exhilaration through her first ever unassisted bike ride, mixed with listening to this song from the 90s, kind of brought me back to a time when I had this mix of emotions and that feeling of freedom that's really difficult to describe, mixed with the trepidation of the fear of the unknown. And I'm kind of set the stage for you. So shortly after my graduation from college, I found myself at this graduation party of my friend. His name was Sean Quealy, and in college we just called each other by our last names. So I was at Quealy's house with my buddy Glenn Ringbloom, and as this graduation party was coming to a close, Quealy and I and Ringbloom went charging out the front door to like a receiving line that you might see at a wedding, full of people. And we ran down that receiving line and gave people high fives and hugs and jumped into this RV and headed out on this amazing adventure that we had planned for the summer. And as we jumped into this RV, my buddy Ringbloom was the first driver, and he drove the first leg on this trip that we'd set up to see every major city and every major landmark in the United States during the course of the summer, so about 2 months. And we decided to drive in shifts, so Ringbloom drove the first shift, and when it was my turn to drive, he's like, "Hey, I don't know if you noticed, but it's hard to keep this thing straight." And he was kind of in charge of getting it inspected and getting it set up and getting it looked at by the mechanic and everything before we went on this trip. So I just kind of trusted him to do that, and I was next up to drive. And when I started driving, I was like, man, this steering column is really, really loose. So I'd like trying to keep it in the lane as I'm driving down the highway down Connecticut, New York. And of course I get the shift where it's like prime commuting time and like super traffic all through Connecticut, New York. And I'm having trouble keeping it in the lane because you can literally turn the wheel on this thing and the RV would keep going straight, and then it would all of a sudden catch it and it'd take like a really hard turn. Now I noticed he was kind of going snake style when he was driving on the very first shift, but I didn't really want to say anything. And he did a really good job disguising how bad the steering column was. So I'm trying to keep it in the lane, and I'm like going snake style from left to right, trying to recorrect it. And then we come to a construction zone, and I have to drive this RV through these construction barriers, or what are called Jersey barriers, which if you don't drive, you don't know what they are. They're about waist height concrete blocks. They set them up between traffic and construction to keep the construction workers safe from the vehicles. And there's literally 6 or 8 inches on either side of this RV to the Jersey barriers. So I'm like barely keeping it in line, like not scraping the RV, but getting pretty close. And then the construction zone kind of opens up into multiple lanes, and then I am trying to keep it in the lane so I'm not hitting other cars. Well, I'm working so hard to keep it in the lane, I'm like so super intense and overcorrecting that all of a sudden I hear woo woo woo, and the cherries and the blueberries are lighting up behind me, and I got to pull over. Now, pulling over on like a 5-lane major road in Connecticut is is not that easy, but I do that. And as the cop is approaching the vehicle, I start to think about all the steps that kind of got me to where I was sitting there being pulled over by this cop. So going back a little bit, I was in college, and about halfway through my college experience, I decided when I graduate, I'm going to buy an RV and drive across the United States and just experience all the really cool things in the country that I'd seen in movies and that are just really famous that I'd always wanted to see. And as college kind of started to wrap up and come to an end, I had a bunch of friends that were applying for grad school and law school, and a bunch of friends that were setting up to launch their careers. And here I was, like, with this plan to drive across the country, but nothing was really materializing. Nobody really wanted to go with me, and I had no money whatsoever, and I couldn't find a vehicle. And my very best friend in college, my roommate at the time, looked at me one day and he goes, "Pete, that trip of yours, that's just a pipe dream. That's not happening." And that kind of lit a fire under me to really kind of make this thing a go. Because people that know me well know that if somebody tells me I can't do something, it really motivates me. So I ended up finding this RV that I'm now driving, or not driving because I'm pulled over in Connecticut. And what this thing was a 1970 Ford Shasta. It was like a decade older than I was at the time, and it was just beat up, but it worked. It had no radio, so we had a boom box with CDs and tapes. If you don't know what a boom box is, and I hate to even have to say that, my students, go ahead and Google what that is. It had a bathroom, but the bathroom didn't work, so that's where we stored all our food. It topped out at 55 miles an hour. You couldn't drive 56 if you tried, unless you were going straight down a hill and you had the pedal to the floor. And I'm sitting in this RV that is old but working, thinking, why did I get myself into this? The first time my father saw this thing, he put both of his hands on his head. He looked at me and goes, "Oh my gosh, Peter, you're not even going to make it to Albany." So I'm questioning myself as this cop pulls up, and he says, "I see you had some trouble keeping in the lane." And I tell him, "Yeah, I think something's wrong with the steering wheel." He said, "Well, you're going kind of slow as well." I said, I know, but this is as fast as this thing goes." And he said, "So what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we just graduated from college. There's a couple of my buddies, and we just bought this thing with the last money that we had, and we wanted to see the country." So he says, "You know what?" He says, "I think that's awesome," and he sets us free to do our thing. So we're back on the road in our RV. The reason why we could afford it was because my parents were so generous and had this graduation party for me, and all my friends and family came over, and they gave me some money here and some food there and some gift cards here to try to make this trip happen. And I found this RV for sale for $2,000. And I told my friends that I was absolutely going, and they were welcome to come with me if they want. And what I found was, because I was so deliberate and intentional about going, they bought in. So we each took $666 and bought this RV for $2,000. And then we each took a couple $100 and put it inside this lead pipe. And we had 2 screws on it. We took the lead pipe and kind of tucked it behind the oven in the little kitchen of the RV. And whenever we needed gas money, we'd open up the lead pipe, reach in, and hope that there was still cash in there. So that was kind of how it all kind of came together. And as I'm pulling away from this policeman, the feeling of exhilaration, of fear and excitement and the unknown just like completely overwhelms me. And we finish our first leg and we get to Pennsylvania. And my kind of heart rate starts to settle down 6 hours later, and we bring it to my buddy Ringbloom's cousin's mechanic, and he takes a look at it and he says, "Gentlemen, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is that you have a steering column that isn't 100%, but the good news is it's not unsafe. It's totally fine to drive with. Nothing's loose or broken or can break that I see. It's just got a lot of play in the wheel. So you can literally turn the wheel 90 degrees and the thing will keep going straight, and all of a sudden it'll catch and move. So as you guys drive, just get better at driving this thing. Or the bad news is you can pay to get it fixed. And we're like, oh, what would that cost? And he gave us a figure. I can't remember what the figure was, but it was way, way, way more than what we paid to purchase this RV. So we're like, let's go for it. So I called my mom, my dad, and told them about the situation and told them that it was safe, but we were going for it. And when I say I called, I don't mean on a cell phone, because there were no cell phones then. We were driving this RV across the country with no internet or anything like that, just a bunch of maps and a giant book that gave us information about what was off the exit of every major interstate across the United States. So we had our book and our map, and we go for it. And over the course of the summer, we're seeing all this really cool stuff and experiencing all this really cool places and meeting these people. And the entire time we're driving snake style across the country. Well, what we come to find out is that not only will this RV only go 55 miles an hour, but it also overheats. And even in New England in the summer, we were overheating. So when it would overheat, we would have to pull the RV over. Essentially, it was broken down, and we'd have to pour water on the engine until it cooled down, and that would take a couple hours, and then we'd get back in and drive again. And we learned that if we kept the temperature of the engine below a certain number, and I can't remember what that number was, but as we watched the needle get closer, we knew we were going to break down, so we just had to keep that needle below whatever temperature it was that the thing would overheat. And as we got into the Southwest, like in Arizona and places like that, we learned that we could really only drive at night. And we also learned that if we turned the heat on, it would really help keep the temperature in the engine down. So we could basically spend the entire summer driving across the country in this RV going 55 miles an hour with the heat blasting. So that's what we did. And it was incredible. And one night we were driving through Arizona, and I was sleeping in one of the little cots up top, and Ringbloom was driving, and I hear the cherries and the blueberries going off. I'm like, oh. So Ringbloom gets pulled over, and the cop walks up to him. It's like 3 in the morning. Because what we did was we'd take 3-hour shifts. So you drive for 3 hours, and you'd be able to sleep for 6 hours while the other two drove. And that was kind of how we worked it. So I was on my sleeping shift, and I'll never forget being half awake and hearing the cop walk up to the side of the RV and saying to my buddy, do you know why I pulled you over? And Ringbloom goes, yeah, I have a pretty good idea, because it probably looked like I was swerving. He goes, yeah, and not only were you swerving and having trouble keeping in the lane, but you're only going 55 miles an hour, and the minimum speed limit on this road is 65. And I'll never forget, Ringbloom said to him, sir, I give you my word that if I could go any faster than 55 miles an hour, I would. We're trying to see the entire country in 2 months, and at 55 miles an hour, it just ain't happening. And then the guy gets a little bit closer to the RV, and at this point, I've climbed down a little ladder, and I'm kind of watching the exchange between the cop and my buddy, and he puts his head inside the RV and goes, what the heck do you have the heat on for? This cop was baffled as to what was happening. So we explained to him that not only did we have a broken steering column and it was hard to keep it in the lane, but that we had to keep the heat on to keep the engine from overheating. And this is how we're driving through the entire country, seeing all the sights. And it was our life dream, because I recruited these 2 guys to come with me, and we made it happen. And the cop was like, that is really, really cool. And he was blown away, and he let us go. And for the rest of the trip, we got pulled over a couple more times and told them what we were doing, and that it was our goal to be able to see all this really cool stuff and do these really cool things. And each time we got pulled over, I'd have that level of exhilaration and fear and not really know what's going on, and everything would work out okay. So what I learned from that was, even if your best friend or your father tells you something's a pipe dream and there's no way you're going to be able to do it, if you forge forward, not only will you be able to make it happen, but people will come with you because they see how serious you are about it and how they want to join you and be a part of it. And don't let people talk you out of your pipe dreams, because that feeling of exhilaration, of excitement mixed with fear and the unknown is such an amazing thing that it compares to riding your bike for the very first time.